Hey guys, welcome to a Groundbreak Games tutorial on creating your own aiming simulator. So you can see we have these moving targets. If I hit the red center of the target, I will accumulate points, and as the target disappears when it's hit, you can't score any more points until it reappears again, so forcing you to switch targets as you go. So we have some customizations and things to make to the first person template today, and then we're going to create some blueprints. And finally, we're going to export the project in its own standalone file or exe file so that you can share it with friends or run it on a different computer and so on. So I hope you guys are ready to get into the engine and learn some more about Unreal 4 blueprints. So using the link below in the description, go ahead and find the launcher download page, and you'll just download and install the launcher wherever you would like it to go. And once the launcher is installed, it should look a little something like this. You just want to go down to the bottom where it says Unreal Engine, and then click Library. And then up here at Engine Versions, you're not going to have any of the My Projects or Engine versions. So just hit the plus sign, and you're going to get a suggestion for which engine you would like to use, or engine version. Today I'll be using 4.26. So if you want to choose that one, you can choose that one. It's just showing 4.25 here because I already have 4.26 installed. For you, it's probably going to say 4.26 up here. So I already have that done, I'll get rid of that. So now that you have the engine itself installed, you should have a box up here that looks like this, and you just want to launch. Okay, so now we have the initial part of the engine coming up. Just click on Games. Next, and we're going to be using a first person template for this one, so just click first person. Next, these selections here I'm going to leave as is with the starter content added in there, because there'll be a couple wall options if you would like to use them for your aiming trainer. Desktop console, blueprint, maximum quality. I'm going to leave ray tracing disabled. If you want to mess around with ray tracing, by all means check that out. And then down here is your path where you're going to install this project when you create it. So that looks good to me. And we'll create project. Okay, so if we hit play here, you can see we have the first person template, which is pretty basic first person shooter setup. And it has a projectile that's firing that has an impulse being generated upon hit something. So you can see these little boxes will move around a little bit when you hit them. So to replicate the weapons in any game that you might be playing, it's probably not going to have so much of a drop, and the projectile is going to be moving a little quicker. Also, the sensitivity and the engine by default is very high. A lot of competitive shooters I know play with pretty low mouse sensitivity, so we'll go in and adjust that first and just kind of get the gun looking and feeling a little more the way that we would like to have it. So to do that, we'll go into blueprints, and first of all, let's see, let's edit the projectile itself. So open that blueprint up. If you go in the viewport and look at it, here's the actual projectile itself. And so when we fire that, it's a little larger than I would personally like to have it, so I'm going to shrink that down first. To do that, we'll grab the sphere itself, and you can come up here and either click, or if you use R, E, or W, you can switch between these three with the keyboard. You're going to be using this selection quite a lot, so I would suggest just kind of when you're in the engine manipulating assets like this, I would get used to using W, E, and R. So if you grab all three of these, you can see that when I move, it's going to either get bigger or smaller. It's right now it's going in, it's moving the size of the static mesh in large chunks because up here we have it set to do so. So normally I come in and I just unclick all of those and change all of my sizes to the smallest increments. It just seems to be the easiest way to get exact adjustments. So I'm going to make the projectile quite a bit smaller. And then we have a collision sphere around the projectile that's actually going to be doing the colliding. So I'll want to also adjust the size of that sphere. We can't do that with these tools up top. So when you select up here into collision components, you'll just come over to sphere radius and size that down just a bit. And if your sphere isn't exactly where you want it, you can adjust the position by moving the static mesh within the collision sphere. So you can just click up here on sphere and move till you get it the way you want. If you want to adjust the camera speed, up here is your camera speed controls. It'll kind of slow it down so you don't zoom past what you're trying to look at. So we'll hit compile and save. Now we have a much smaller projectile. And you can see there's quite a bit of drop on this projectile. So if we come in here and we click on projectile itself down here, you're going to get the attributes for this projectile. The speed itself right here, I would change, try around 5,000. Bouncing you can leave on if you would like. This is where you're going to come in and adjust how bouncy and how long the projectile lasts. So let's check out 5,000. That's much nicer. A little more like a bullet. I'm noticing though it's not quite centered on the middle of the crosshair. That's kind of an issue, so that's also something I would like to sort of take care of real quick. So in order to do that, we're going to go to first person HUD, which has already been created down here, and open that up. So if we come in here to the first person HUD, what we're basically doing is taking our screen, dividing in half in both directions. So we have X and Y, and we're splitting those two in half so we have a center point in order to draw that crosshair. So if I come in here and drag out from this little integer node here, by typing plus on the keyboard, you're going to get a float plus float. So we can go ahead and plug that in between here and X. And let's see what happens when we go a fairly large number. So you guys can see. Now, if you take a look, the crosshairs moved way over to the right. So let's reconnect that and see exactly where we need to move it. So it looks like our crosshair is actually just over to the right, a little too far. And so what we would have to do here is, let's hook this back up and use a -5. And see if that lines our crosshair up a little better. Yeah, it looks like it's pretty close to being on the money. You can adjust that a little bit and get it so that your gun is aiming accurately. As you can see, if you change or add down here as well, you're going to move for elevation. So if you don't want that slight drop and you want to compensate for that, you could also add an integer into the screen Y as well and play around with elevation adjustments that way. So now that we've got that fixed up, let's take a look at what else we need to do here. So one thing I did just notice is that depending on the size of my screen, if we hit F11 and change the screen size, our projectile is right on target, but when I maximize the screen size, it is falling a little short. That's because we're using the actual screen itself and dividing the size of the screen in half, so it's moving that crosshair. Now, the best thing to do in this situation would be to go back to our first person HUD, and you can just based on what your maximum monitor size is, you can adjust this so that when you're in full screen, your projectile lines up and is sighted correctly. So I'm just going to copy and paste this, come down to screen Y, and I'm going to add a positive 15 and see where that gets me. So I'll hit play, and then this time remember to hit F11 so that I'm maximized. And that's pretty close to being right in the center there. So adjust that until you get it working correctly for your screen size when you're in full screen. And when you launch the game, once the game is exported as an exe file and you launch the game and play it, it's going to go into your native monitor size anyway. So we'll be set up for that. So one thing I did notice that I would also like to fix is that when the game starts, the mouse is on the screen by default, and you have to like click on the screen to get it to come off. So I just want to quickly jump to the first person character to fix this. And when you open this up, there's logic on the event graph that is already here. You can see event begin play at the very top. So we'll pull this out to give ourselves some room here and go ahead and disconnect this. And the first thing we'll have to do is get our player controller. Now from player controller, we can set game mode only. And we'll just plug that in. And now if we go ahead and play, the mouse is not showing by default. So the last thing we'll have to do before we create the moving targets themselves is to adjust the mouse sensitivity, which is a bit high by default. So to do that, we'll come up to Edit and then open Project Settings. And under Engine on the left here, you'll see a little tab called Input. And if you come to the top here under Axis Mappings, there's a little Advanced section that is collapsed by default. So open that up. And at the top in those settings, there's an Axis Config tab. So open that up as well. And you'll see Mouse X and Mouse Y down here. So if you open these two, you'll see that the sensitivity is set at 0.07 by default. You'll have to sort of mess around with this to get it close to what you usually run your mouse at for your shooter games. I'm going to put a 0.4 there. And then anything you add to the project settings will automatically save. So just changing, you don't have to like hit save or anything. You just change the numbers and it's already set. So we can close that. And if you hit play and just check that out, you can kind of go back and adjust as needed, but 0.04 seems to work pretty well for me. Okay, so the next thing that we'll need to do is actually create the moving target that is going to needed to be shot to score the first set of points. So since the camera is facing this side, we can go ahead and kind of clean up this area a little bit and get some things out of our way. In order to do that quickly, if you click and select a box, you can see it just jumps from whatever you click. But if you hold Control and click, you are able to select multiple things at once. So let's select all these boxes and delete using Delete key. And you'll see that our shadows from those larger items are still present. So we can also get rid of this text right here, just so it's less annoying. Then let's go ahead and save. And in order to get rid of these persistent shadows here, there'll be another one when I get rid of this. There's a couple things that we can do to quickly get rid of those. First of all, up in the world outliner up here, if you find your light source, which is a movable light, but currently set to stationary, if you click movable, you'll see that we get rid of those shadows. So the only reason they're still painted there is because we need to do a quick lighting build. And if you come up here and click next to build, we can do build lighting only. And you'll see that it's already set to preview, which is the fastest kind of light build. So we'll go ahead and leave it there and just quickly build that lighting. Alright, so now we have the shadows out of the way and be a little less distracting when we spawn in to start our shooting gallery. Now to create the moving target itself, while we're in here in the blueprints folder, you can just right click and go to blueprints class, and then we want to create an actor blueprint. I'm going to call mine moving target and then save. Now if we open this up, you'll see we just have this blank actor blueprint. And the first thing that we'll want to do here is create a few variables. So over here on the left, you'll see that under variables we can hit plus and create a new one. So I'm going to call this position 1, and then we'll change that to a vector by clicking here, and then we'll duplicate that and we'll just call this position 2. Now we'll need one more variable. We'll call this one duration, and then we need to change the type of this one to a float. So if we come up to the variable we just created, position 1, and if you would like to get this little tutorial thing to stop, you can click on it, whoops, and exit. Sorry if that's been being annoying. So we've clicked on position 1 here on this variable. We're going to need to change a couple settings. We want to make this instance editable, show 3D widget, and expose on spawn. And then we can do the same exact thing here. Now these will be placed in the world and move, so we don't have to actually set a value for either one of these. On duration, we just want to make sure that this is instance editable as well. Okay, so now we have our variables set up. We're gonna have to change the value of them during runtime. So the first thing that we're gonna want to do is come up to add component, and we're gonna add a component that's called interp to movement. So if you click on this and come over to the right, this is going to set up the movement between position 1 and position 2. And you can see right here that behavior type is set to one shot. So that would mean it's going to move the target from point 1 to position 1 to 2 and then just stop. So we want to change that to ping pong so that it goes back and forth. Now under construction script here on the left, under functions, if you double click that, you'll see there's a construction script waiting to be built here. So we'll need to pull in position 1 and position 2. And just to show you a shortcut, if you pull in a variable and you're holding Alt, you're going to get a setter. And if you pull in that variable using Control, you get a get. So if you don't and just pull it straight in, you'll see that it's going to ask you get or set. So it's just a shortcut to quickly pulling in gets and sets. So I'll pull in both these variables here, and off position 1 we're going to make interp control point, and I can copy and paste that, and we'll need that connect to position 2 as well. Off here we can go make array, and we can add a pin and just plug these in here. Whoops. So off of this make array, we're going to have to set those control points. So we want to grab our interp to movement node, hold Control and have it get. Drawing off that, we want to set, and then control points under Control will bring up a variable, and you can see that there's an array input, so we can connect those two up. Now we'll also need to have the duration, so we can get that off of our interp to movement, and we want to set that also. Now this just means at the beginning when you hit play, it's going to set up those two control points and whatever duration you have set up. And we need to, you could manually set the duration here, but you want to be able to control the duration that it takes to move between point 1 and 2. You want to be able to control that individually on and not have it statically set. So we'll actually pull in our duration variable here and plug that in, so that as you're setting these up, you can change it by changing that duration variable. And then we just need to connect the construction strip input, and we're good to go here. So as you can see though, if you check this out in the viewport, there's nothing here. We just have the ability to move from one point to another, but we have nothing, we wouldn't see anything moving. So I have to set something in order to see it. So under add component, we can add a static mesh, and I'm actually going to using, whoops. And I'm going to actually create a duplicate of this, and if you use F2, you will rename an object. And I'll call these inner circle and outer circle, and I'll show you why here in a second. So on inner circle, what we can do is make this a sphere, which is what we got in the shape sphere, will work just fine. So we've created a sphere using the starter content here, and then you can copy the static mesh, and we'll make this one a sphere as well. Now these static meshes can be anything that you come up with. When you see what we're doing with it here, I'm sure that you can look around and find some free objects or something on the marketplace, and I'll look around for something a bit better looking, but for now this should work just fine. So one thing I want to do is flatten this circle out so that it looks a bit more like a target. So we'll just go about there. And that's the outer circle. So the inner circle I want to take and leave as a full sphere, but make smaller. And then we'll position that right in the center. Now for this inner circle, I want it to be a different color so that we have the target floating around, but we have to hit this sphere in the center for it to actually consider it a point. So what I'll do is I'll find the basic wall material that is set for this by clicking the magnifying glass, and then you just want to right click and duplicate that. I'll just call this basic ball, call that whatever you want. So if we open that material up, you'll see it's just a very simple little material here, and we have a color chooser, so I can double click on that and change this to a different color. And save. Now, if we come back into our inner circle here, we'll just want to change that to our new material, and then we can compile and save, and we have a nice red target here. So now we can pull this target out into the world, and you'll see it's not quite positioned the way we want it to be. So we'll move it where it initially needs to be in the direction. And then I'm going to make several of these, so we'll just start right about here at the bottom. And then holding Alt, if you pull any direction, you will get a copy of what you're pulling off of. So holding Alt a couple times, I'm going to make a couple of these. Actually, let's not make a couple of these yet. Taking this first one, we'll need to select position 1 and 2, which are down here at the bottom, and they're these kind of little diamond shaped things. So if I click around till I get the actual wireframe, you can see we have position 1 and 2 able to be moved. So if I set position 2 over here and position 1 over here, so one thing that we'll need to do very quickly also is we never set a value for the duration. So this is going to determine how long it takes to ping pong back and forth between position 1 and position 2. And right now it's set to 0. So you can see it's basically 2 places at the same time. So if we set this to, let's just set it to 5 and see what that looks like, and then you'll have your moving target between your 2 points. So initially that looks fine. I can adjust that as I go as we create more of these, but for now I'm going to actually slow it down a little bit just so my terrible aim doesn't take a long time to test it. So now if we go 10 seconds, you can see it's nice and slow, and I can hopefully hit the target when things are adjusted a little bit. So I'm going to move my spawn up just a little closer. That looks pretty good. So if you take a look at how they've set up the first person template, they have a first person character drug into the world, and then there's also a spawn point here. So you can see if you have the character in the world and you move the spawn point, it doesn't matter. It will spawn wherever the character's set. If another way of doing this, you wouldn't need actually to have this placed in the world. If you were creating a world where there's like dying and respawning, you would just use the player start and then different spawn points to appear to keep the player controller. But to spawn a new character, you would use a spawn point then if a player had died. So this is just another way to do it, but you can use the player start as well. And you can see that where this is set up, we just want to turn it 180 degrees. Yeah, that's about the center. So that's just another way to create the spawn point itself. And that's a pretty good distance in order to hit the target. So I'm going to leave it there. Now, one nice thing about having a player drug into the world is when you are positioning, you can use the camera to see what the character is going to see when it first spawns into the world. So as you can see down here, we do have the option to have that camera, so you would be able to tell exactly what it's going to look like. That's just a little tool that you can use if you have it set up this way with the player spawn, but you want to be able to see what the player is going to see when he's in the world. You can just drag in that character. So I just wanted to mention that. Okay, so the next thing that we're going to need to do is to create some functionality when we actually hit the target. So in order to do that, let's open our target back up. And we have this inner circle and outer circle here. But we only want to have something happen when we hit the inner circle. This is more or less just to accentuate so it's easier to see as it's moving, but the inner part is the only thing that we want to have register as a hit. So if you select inner circle here and come into the event graph, you'll notice as long as this is selected, we can select and delete these to get them out of our way. When I right click here, while inner circle is selected, there's going to be a couple options at the top that aren't there if that is not selected. So you'll see up here they disappeared. So whoops. So as inner circle is selected and you right click, you'll see the add event for inner circle is here. If you open that up and go into collision and find add on component hit, whenever that component is hit by something, which then we'll be able to check what hit it, it's going to fire off this event. So if you click that, we'll bring that into our event graph. And now we have a pulse firing when something hits the inner circle. So it will also tell us what the object references are and so on. And if we split the struct pin, you can see there's lots of options down here. Hit location, hit normal, bone name, all these things. So we'll just leave that like it is. The first thing that we'll want to do when we actually hit our target is going to be to spawn some sound. So in order to do this, we can go spawn sound 2D. And for now, so after looking through the free assets in the starter package, I couldn't find a sound that would be suitable for a hit sound. So what I did was went to this website called freesound.org and found a tonal impact, and I'll leave the link for this sound in the description, but you can see that this is a Creative Commons licensed sound, and so it doesn't require even any credit. If you would like to give this person credit, we all probably should, so please do, but it's not required. And if you check out the sound, it sounds pretty good for what we're trying to do with it. So when you download this, just save it wherever you can actually drag and drop it, and go into wherever you would like to put the sound in your which folder you would like to put it into. I'm just going to put it into blueprints, or we could actually come in here and create a folder. Right click in here, new folder, and we'll just call this sounds. In case we want to add more sounds later, we'll keep things organized. So once you're in here, you can just drag and drop this. And this is created in a format that will drag and drop directly into Unreal Engine. You can always tell if something can be dragged and dropped immediately, because when you pull it in here, you'll have a little plus sign on where you're pulling it in. If it's a file that the engine doesn't recognize, you won't get that symbol. So if I pull that in, you can see we have this nice sound. And I'm just going to rename this to hit so that we can quickly find it. And then in our spawn sound 2D, you can go ahead and type hit and find your sound. And then when we hit our inner circle target, we should be able to spawn this sound and know that we've hit it. So another thing that we can do in order to know that we hit this inner circle is to make it disappear for a certain amount of time. So to do that, we'll just actually grab this and bring it in holding control and get the setter. Get the getter, and dragging off of that will set visibility. When you set visibility, new visibility unchecked or untrue is not visible. New visibility true would be visible. So what we're going to do is just set a 5-second timer and change that visibility. So pulling off here will create a delay, make it 5 seconds. Copy and paste that, and we'll just hook it up. So let's test this out and see if we have it working. Perfect. And it should then reappear. It did not, so I did not check new visibility. Now let's give it a test. Perfect. Okay, so when we get a hit, we're going to want to start to accumulate some points so that we can have points activate the next area and the next area and so on. So in order to do that, we want that to take place. I'm going to divide these up because we want that event to take place before this delay starts timing down. And since we don't want to disrupt the signal coming into that delay, we're going to need to create a sequence right here. Now, there's a few nodes in Unreal that you're going to use quite a bit. Sequences are definitely one of them. The other one is a branch, and delays like we just created. So you can right click anywhere in the event graph and type these things out, like branch for instance, and find it. But Unreal has given shortcut keys for certain things that you use consistently. So to make a sequence, you can also just hold S on your keyboard and click anywhere, and it will create a sequence. And the same with B for branch and D for delay will all create these nodes instantly. As you get working with blueprints a lot more, you're going to find that these three are very, very commonly used. So it's nice to be able to use just the keys, like for each loop is F and so on. So there are some keys that you can use to quickly drop these nodes. So our sequence can go right here, and what a sequence does is it just fires off 0, then 1, then 2, right all down the list, so that you don't disrupt timing of needing to start your delay, so that it's only 5 seconds in between hitting and reappearing. But you want to add some sort of a point here as well, so we can pull off this then 1, and it's going to happen directly after then 0. So in order to store points, you could store them in the first person character, or we could store them in a game mode, because the game mode is going to stay consistent and be able to accumulate all of these points, where if you and a friend are playing and you want the points that are accumulated to be combined between you and your friend, if we make this project multiplayer at some point down the road, then you would want to keep them separate from the player, because keeping that point system in the player character would divide those points up, so you would have your own points and your buddy would have his own points. If we want to accumulate them all into one place, game mode would be a much better place to do that. So you can see if you type in game mode, we already have a first person game mode created for us in Blueprints. Now by default, every game is going to have a game mode, just like every character blueprint already has a player controller attached to it as well. But until you create the blueprint itself, it will just be inherent in the engine. So there is a game mode already set no matter what. But if I right click and go to blueprint class and create my own game mode, which there's a game mode base here, if I were to click that and create one, that allows me to actually manipulate that blueprint. So you're going to have a game mode set no matter what, but this one itself we can open up and manipulate the settings and so on in it. So all we really need to do in here is create a variable that we can save, and we'll just call that points, and then we can change that to an integer so we can store a total number of points. So now that we have that set up in our moving target, we can just go get game mode, and then we can cast to our actual first person game mode, because this is just the generic. It's going to find whatever game mode is being used. It doesn't care which one it is. If we want to make sure that we're talking to a specific one, we can cast directly to it, because if the cast fails, like if we had more than one game mode because we had multiple levels, which we may or may not at some point do that, then the game mode itself would only, this get game mode would only care that about whatever game mode is being used at the time. If we want to make sure there's a specific one we're talking to, we can cast to it so that it fails if it isn't the correct game mode that we're looking for. So cast to first person game mode should allow us to access this and then also access our points. And I'm going to make this variable public and editable on each instance of this blueprint. So we can connect up our sequence and cast to first person game mode. We need to get our points so that we have our current points, and then we're going to add integer, and we just want to add 1 point every time. And then in order to make sure that we aren't able to continually shoot the target when the inner circle has disappeared and continue getting points, which would be easier than being forced to switch targets. I'm also going to make this point addition a do once. And then in order to reset it, we're just going to wait the 5 seconds that it takes in order for the target to reappear again. So if we create a sequence here, plug the delay in, and then plug it in to reset, what's going to happen is no matter what happens here, it's going to only allow this to take place one time until 5 seconds has gone by. Then it's going to reset. So then we want to take our +1, 2 points and set our points now. And since we have the do once before the sequence, this action of adding 1 point to our current points can only happen one time every 5 seconds. So that should keep us from being able to accumulate points over and over by shooting the same target, forcing the player to switch to a different target every time the inner circle's been hit. So now that we've created this point, we can test this and see if it's working by making a print string and then plugging in our current points to the print string. Oops. Now you see at the top left corner of the screen there was a 1 that popped up when I hit the target. So I know that we're scoring points, and now I hit it again, there's a 2. So that's perfect. Now even though the sound is going, if I hit it while the red circle isn't there, it didn't add a separate point until the red circle's there. So that's fine. Now, if you wanted to make it so that you didn't get a sound, we can go ahead and add this sound down here instead, and this will only, since this portion of the logic is only going to, this portion of the logic is only going to fire once every 5 seconds. If we put our spawn sound at the end here, we're not going to get that second sound firing while the red circle is on. And no point accumulation until it has returned. Okay, so the only thing we really need to do here at this point is to create a few of these, and then we're going to start adding the points up in a way that we can actually see them on the screen. So let's first of all just grab this moving target, and we're going to make a few of these now. And then just to sort of change it up a little bit, we'll start at the bottom, leave that, go to the second one, and we're going to grab position 1 and 2 and just swap them. And we're also I'm going to adjust the length a little bit so that they are timed a bit differently. And then we can also adjust the duration to make that even more apparent. So I'll leave that one where it is, but we're going to take the duration, find it over here. And let's make this one a little faster. This one a little slower. And we'll leave that one the same. And then we can also, when we select these, we can also come in and just sort of move their starting positions a little bit so that it's a bit more confusing. And now you see we have a nice target range. Now, I personally don't like the shadows back there. I think that's kind of distracting. So we'll go into moving target, select both of these. And just type shadow and then uncheck cast shadow for both. You can see it's not quite as distracting. Now that's pretty simple, so I think some of these need to be moving a little faster. Let's actually go 5, 5, leave that 8. And we'll not make that one 12, we'll make that one 6. And I'm also going to make the inner circle just a little smaller. Now, if you wanted to add different points for different rings or different size targets, you can just create more of these and do the same thing that we're doing here, but created for each one of these and then add a different amount of points and so on. So any way you want to customize this, once you see how it all works, all you would need to do is, like with outer circles, select it, right click, find your collision hit event and copy and paste, but using outer circle. And then let's say 2 points for hitting the center, 1 point for hitting the outside. And then if you wanted to make a third and fourth, however you want to do it. Now that's a little too hard. So I'll actually go back and resize this the way it was. Much harder, but not impossible. Okay, so now we just need to create a small widget to display the points on the screen as we're collecting them. So in order to do that, we'll have to first create the actual file. You can right click here in your blueprints folder, and then at the bottom you'll see user interface and create a widget blueprint. And we're just going to call this points. We'll call this stats, because we might add a few things down the road to this. If we open up stats, you'll see that you have a designer and a graph. So your code for this is going to go in graph, and what it actually looks like on your screen will be shown in the designer. So the first thing we'll add in the designer is some text. We just drag this in here, and I'm going to put mine in the left hand side. Over on the right, you can manipulate your text block. So I'm going to call this points. so we know which one it is if we add multiple later on. And for what is in the text box, we're going to make a bind for that. First, I want to so here we have our font and size. I just want to make this a bit bigger. Make it like 32. Okay, so we will need to create this bind here. And this bind is going to tell the text blocks what text needs to be in there. So when you click create a binding, it's just going to create a place to build that binding and set what the value of the text is going to be. So we can easily get our game mode, which is where our points are. Cast to first person game mode. Now with links, when it comes to breaking links or moving them, if you hold Alt and click, you break a link. And if you need to move a link from one pin to another, you can just hold Control, grab that, move it. So break that link between the cast and connect it up. Give ourselves a little room here. Now we'll need to get our points again. And this will convert automatically, so we can just plug that in there. And now anytime this value is changed, it's going to update that bind and change this text block. Now you notice if we hit play, there's no points up in the top left because we haven't told our first person character to draw this widget yet. So we know this widget's called stats. We can get rid of that. We can go into, oh, that's not our first person. Let's close these out. Open up our first person character, and where we made set input to game mode only, we will need to pull off of our player controller again. And just to keep it clean, I'll add a reroute node. Dragging off here. Create score. Oh, I'm sorry. Create widget. And that widget is going to be stats. So we can break that by holding Alt, connect this up, and then we're going to need to add, we're creating the widget, but we need to add it to the viewport of our player. So I can move these a little. Drawing off here, add to viewport. And then connect that back up. Now you can see in the top left corner our score is set to 0. I got the inner circle. You can see we're accumulating points. So that pretty much covers the initial build for the aiming trainer. There's a lot more to come, and we're going to add and sort of polish this up with some free assets and make this a progression so that you score a certain number of points, and at a certain level that's set, it will unlock the next target area and the next, and so on. and we'll just make it a bit more complicated each time we go, so you can continue learning new things that we can add to the aiming training and make it a bit of a progression to see how fast or how many points you can score in a certain amount of time. So in order to export, the way I like to personally do it, because I use a full build every time instead of only trying to add to my export what I have done since the last time, which would make sense if you're working on a huge game with thousands of assets and it takes a really long time to export. I can understand doing that, but for small builds, there's so many issues that can happen during export that I like to keep it very simple by only exporting an export copy and then just deleting that copy when it's done. So all of the file swelling is done away with, and you're starting from the version that you left off with before you exported it. Hopefully that makes sense. So let's see here. So if I come into my projects folder and find aim trainer, what I can do is create a new folder and just call this export aim trainer, and I'll just copy the whole project. And since this is a very small project, you can see it moves quickly. So now this is a whole separate copy of the aim trainer that I'm going to export and then delete when I'm done. And if you can see, this number of files here is going to increase when we export it. So for me, it's much easier to remember where I'm at on my exporting if I just export an entire copy and delete that copy of the game when I'm done. So if we open up this export aim trainer, it's going to be the exact same project we just worked on, as you can see. And first, we'll just come up here, and if you were working with lots of assets that you haven't used, meaning you have them in the engine installed in the project, but you aren't actually using them in the game, if you cook the content first, it's only going to add into the game the files that are being used in the game itself. So it's an option for you to cook first. It's not really necessary. It can save time depending on what stage you are. For this particular aiming trainer that is very small, I'm just going to go ahead and package the project. So when you go to package, you'll just come down to Windows, and then it's going to ask you where you would like to have the output go. Now, one issue you run into when packaging is that I don't remember the exact path character limit, but if your path is too long, you can actually fail an export. So what I usually tend to do is go right into the drive itself and put a folder, because this is going to be deleted anyway, and I'll just call it export. And that way, when you export, your path starting with your whatever drive you're working in is only going to be path export, and then the actual game itself. This will help in not failing an export. If you were to go into many subdirectories, your path limit will be reached and it will fail. It will tell you that in the output log when you check your reasons why your export failed, but it's better just to avoid it. So if we select, the minute you select your folder, it's going to immediately start to export. So just make sure that you're in the folder that you are using and hit select folder, and immediately when you hear that sound, you're now packaging the project. Now if you click show output log, this is going to show you the package as it's all happening, and if you hit any errors, this is where you're going to find them. This being a very small and simple project right now, we shouldn't have any errors, but this is, see, it's already completed, and it will tell you build successful at the bottom. So now we know if we go back into the directory that we chose we have Windows no editor. So I normally immediately, so this doesn't get confusing, immediately hit F2 on that and change the name, whoops, to whatever you want, so that you don't get your projects confused. If you open this up, all of your files for the game are in here, and your exe file is here as well. So if we run this in standalone, you can see we've created our first exported project, and we're accumulating points. Now, we didn't add a way to exit the game, so for now, in order to get out, just Alt F4 to close it, and you will be able to exit. Next time we'll add an escape menu, or at least exit the game with escape or something like that. So that's it for the project for now. I hope that was useful and informative for some of you. If you have any questions or things aren't working properly, you can feel free to leave me a question in the comments below. You can also check out the Discord link in the video description, and please feel free to come to the Discord and show off your customizations to your aiming trainer. Let me know if you have any questions. If there's any ideas or things you would like to know so that you can better customize, please feel free to leave that in the Discord as well. And in the next week, we will continue working on this and adding more functionality and more customizations. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Please feel free to leave a like and maybe consider subscribing if this was useful. I should have a lot more content coming out soon, as well as some videos dealing with my own game on Steam called Age of Omens that I'll be using to sort of explain and teach about the engine as well as I'm working on my own game. So if this is something you guys are interested in, please feel free to join the community and come say hi.